Welcome. I am so excited to be with you today to present the ProNoCoders Complete Bubble tutorial for beginners in July of 2023. I'm going to start off with some introductions. First, I am Tanya Iosa. I founded ProNoCoders at the end of 2020 after having become a professional Bubble developer and product manager. ProNoCoders is primarily an educational company in the no-code space. Our flagship product is our office hours membership, where we meet with our members 7 times per week on Zoom and answer any of their no-code questions that they might have. We are experts in Bubble, Didify, Xano, Flutterflow, and APIs generally, and it's not just me. I have a fantastic team helping out. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to pronocoders.com/office-hours to sign up for a complimentary session. We'd love to meet you and see what you're building with no-code. ProNoCoders also owns No-Code School. We currently have 250 hours of curriculum teaching no-code development from the very beginning all the way through to professional and advanced concepts. You can learn more about No-Code School at pronocoders.com/nocode-school. In this tutorial, we're going to be borrowing our Who's Who template from our Bubble Foundations course in No-Code School. We're going to build the same app, but not go into nearly as much detail. It takes about 50 hours for us to cover everything that we need to in No-Code School. We're going to try to keep this tutorial to just a few hours. For a copy of the template that we're using today, and also the scope, you can go ahead and email me at team@pronocoders.com and I'll get you set up. So in our tutorial today, we're going to start with discussing what we're going to learn. Then we'll cover the scope and template. Then we'll build out our database. And then we'll build out the app page by page. So what are we going to learn? First, we're going to cover the database. We're going to cover basic database design and how to set up your database before you start working to kind of simplify and streamline your build process. As part of that discussion, we're going to go over user types, which we'll be talking about throughout the build, and also privacy and security using privacy rules. Then, as we're building the app, we're going to cover the rest of this information, capturing and storing information using forms and data types, controlling the interface, so showing and hiding elements. We're going to do that with workflows only, and then we're going to show you how to do it with workflows and conditions, which is much more powerful and scalable, including utilizing the URL parameters, page paths, custom states, and hidden variables. We'll also talk about controlling the interface with design basics, specifically responsive design basics, so hiding and showing elements combined with making the app look the way that you want it to look. We're going to cover displaying information, so the different content types which will come into play as we're building our database, but also as we're showing information from our database. And then singular versus list data, so working with one record in a database and how to show that, and then how to show lists of records in your database. At the end, we're going to deploy our apps to live and talk about the difference between managing live and test environments of an app. And throughout the whole thing, we'll talk about this common theme of moving data around an app, because at its core, an app is storing information and moving it around, either with the user present or the user not present in the app. So we'll talk about how to store and move data around, and then we're going to talk about how can you make your app do things when the user isn't there to press a button or interact with the app in some way. So let's take a look at the scope. So first, our template was built by Michael Collins. He did the design template, and we're very fortunate to be working on his incredible design. Michael Collins is a ProNoCoder and a No-Code School graduate, and we are very appreciative. I'll come back to showing you the screens of the template, but first let's just talk about the objective of this tutorial. We're going to demonstrate the Bubble skills needed to build an app from start to finish. The purpose of the app that we're going to be using, the Who's Who app, it's a basic directory app, so users are going to be able to sign up, enter their information, see the information of other users, and then have an app admin be able to moderate the users in the app. So the user types that we're going to need to build out are app admin and standard users. We'll be touching on the index, home, login, account, admin portal, profile, portal, reset password, and 404 pages. We'll also be dealing with a header, and I think also a footer, but definitely the header as reusable. Then we'll talk about the external interactions. We have one where one of the emails that we'll send out will have a link back to the app that is a special link for resetting the password. We're going to go over the database first, actually. I put it at the bottom, and I'll explain that in a moment. And then we'll be sending out 3 different kinds of emails from the app. Now let's take a look at the screens. So the screens here, this is a design that Michael put together for us in the design template, so we don't have to worry about making things look good as we go. In general, this is the way I prefer to build apps, is to start with the design already done and then add the logic to it. And the difference between this tutorial and other tutorials is we're going to focus less on the design aspect and more on the logic aspect. So we won't have to worry about the tedium of making everything look just right. We'll just worry about when we need to make changes to the template. It's time to get started. So let's start with our database discussion, our basic database design. So I think the most important thing to understand is that creating your database is not or does not have to be on the fly as you're building. In fact, I find it easier when we start with a scope. So the scope is out of scope for this video. We won't be going into how to construct and build a scope and get things organized before you start building. We do have a course on that in No Code School, though, if you're interested. But what it is important to understand is when you do that pre-work before you even start building, you can derive your basic database design from the scope itself. As an example, if I go into my index scope here. This is for the index page, which is a built-in page in Bubble. It's a special page type that you cannot delete. It must exist. And you can see here that I've identified the purpose of our index as a switchboard. We're going to use it as a blank page with nothing on the interface that's just going to detect whether a user is logged in or not, and then it's going to detect what kind of user it is, and it's going to send that user where they belong based on those 2 things. So the title is just going to be the who's who, and then the permissions, no one can stay on this page. Everyone is going to be rerouted from the page. And then when I get into this section here, this main section, I'm going to show you it's a blank screen. There's no design elements on it. And the logged in users are going to be navigated to an appropriate page. If they are active, they're going to be sent to, and they are admin users, they'll be sent to the admin portal. If they're active standard users, they'll go to the user portal. If they're inactive users, they'll be sent to the 404 page. And if they're logged out, they'll be sent to the home page. From here, because I've decided all of this up front before even starting to build the app, I can tell a couple of things about my database just from this section. So if I come into my database here and I look at my data type, specifically the user type, I know that I have to have these 2 different fields. Active implies that I know whether a user is active or inactive, so I'm going to need an inactive field to show whether they're active or inactive. And then I need to know whether the user is an admin or if they are a standard user. And so that means I need to know what type of role that they have. So it's not going to be a good use of our time trying to condense this in a few hours to go through and derive all of the different parts together in the video. So we'll kind of head into mechanical mode in a moment and just go ahead and create the database as it's laid out for us here in the scope. But if you're wondering, that's where the information comes from. That's how we decide what goes into the database before the build. So we've been working on we just finished our conversation around basic database design. Now we're moving into setting up our database. Just to keep up with our list here, some housekeeping. I'm going to go ahead and complete our introductions and tutorial agenda and our basic database design here. So setting up our database, the first thing we need to talk about is the anatomy of a data type. So let's go ahead and go into our editor itself. So this is the Bubble editor for my Who's Who template that we're going to be working with. We are currently on what's called the Design tab. This is where you interact with elements on the page to take care of and manage the design and the way that the app looks. We're going to skip over the workflow and go straight into this data tab here. And this is what is representative of your app's database. So all of the semi-permanent and permanent storage of data on your in your app. If you're familiar with, let's say, Airtable, or a spreadsheet like Google Spreadsheets, Google Sheets, you'll be somewhat familiar with the conversation that we're about to have. A data type is what Bubble calls what other people call a data table. And essentially, if I come into my app data here, this is the structure of how we're going to put all of those data tables together, and this is kind of representative of what actually is stored in any one of those data tables. So you'll see that Bubble gives me the user data type, and it's built in, and I can't delete it. There's no trash can box here. I can't get rid of it. And if I come into the app data and I'm looking at my user table, so all of my users, you can see that I have these columns here and I have rows. And a data table or data type at its core is just saying, hey, here's the structure. We're going to have these columns, and then every row is going to contain information with these columns. This email column is saying, hey, this is an email data content type, and everything in this column for each row is going to be of that same type. So that's a kind of a constraint in the database. So here the user has an email field, and that is a built-in field that we can't delete, and it has to be an email, and it also has to be unique. And what I mean by unique is that if I have 3 rows in my user table, none of the 3 or any of them can have the same email as another row. So 2 users can't share the same email. And that is enforced at the database level and enforced by Bubble specifically for the user table. Now, of course, I can't just have a bunch of users with emails and have that be interesting. Nobody's going to be looking at a data table of just user emails and find that interesting in an app. I'm going to want to expand this and customize it to the data that I need for my app. When I do that, I'm going to have to create new fields. And when I create a new field on a data table, I can name it, which is pretty standard. You'll be able to give it a name. And I will also have to specify what kind of content is going to be contained in that field. So as I was mentioning before, in my app data section here, if this is the email column, all of these users will have to have an email in the email column in order to have a record in the database. So now I'm going to create a new field, and I'm going to say what kind of information needs to be contained in that field or column for that data table. Now there are some built-in generic types that Bubble uses, and then we have the custom types that we're going to be talking about. So the generic types include text, number, numeric range, date range, date interval, yes, no, file, image, and geographic address. We are going to cover text, number, date, yes, no, file, and image in this tutorial. The thing to understand about Bubble specifically is you might be familiar in, like, say, an Airtable, that you would have to specify whether a number is going to be a whole number or an integer versus a decimal, or sometimes it's called a double. And Bubble will detect if the number has a decimal in it, so you don't have to specify one way or the other when you're creating the container or the field for that kind of information. Another interesting thing about Bubble is with the date here, whenever I specify that a field is going to be a date, in other systems, maybe like Xano, you would have to specify whether it's just going to be the date, meaning a month, day, and year, or whether it's going to be like a timestamp, so month, day, year, and also a time. In Bubble, all of the dates are working with our timestamps. So it includes the month, day, year, and also the time of day. and it's relative. So the way that the date displays and is used is relative to the user's time zone. So if I am in one place and I put in a date and it's 10 a.m. my time, it might be 1 p.m. for someone on the East Coast since I'm on the West Coast of the United States. The yes-no here, you might see this called a Boolean or a true-false in other systems. It just means that it has to be one or the other. In Bubble, if I leave it blank, it's going to, even though it doesn't have a value, it's going to treat that value as a no. And it gets a little bit tricky to work with that, so we'll talk about that more as we go. For file storage and image storage, actually both of these things are very similar. Bubble treats the image a little bit differently because it goes ahead and it tries to display images when you're using image elements. But essentially, a file field or an image field is a text field storing in a URL to Bubble's S3 storage by default. So that explains the basic content types. Then we have the data table types or the data reference types. You can see the user is here because Bubble automatically has a user table. You can see that I already have another data type here. We'll see this in the option sets in a moment called data. And then these were added through some plugins that we were using at some point. So you will see this list will expand as we add new data types and option sets, and sometimes even plugins and APIs as we go. All right, the reason this conversation is super important is because Bubble is constantly going to be trying to match up data types. And if you try to compare a text to a number, Bubble will often be, well, I'm anthropomorphizing Bubble here, but Bubble will often be mad or show red instead of blue because you can't use a text in a number field, right? The same goes with whether we're talking about a list of things or if we're talking about a singular piece of data. So I can put one text in a field, or I might decide I'm going to put multiple text in the field. And if I'm getting technical, actually it means multiple text separated by a comma. And Bubble will want to make sure that it knows whether you're trying to work with a singular piece of data or a list of data because it treats them differently. And you'll need to understand that in order to resolve things to blue. So the blue-red conversation in Bubble has to do with matching up content types and lists versus singular data. Let's talk about the anatomy of an option set. So option sets are very similar to data types. A data type has a name, and then it has fields, and the fields can be of different types. We already talked about the built-in emailed field. All data types also have a modified date, meaning the last date and time that the record was modified, a created date and time that it was created, and a slug, which is also unique per record. And this is in any data type, and it has to be a text. Option sets, on the other hand, are if you were to take each data type that you created, like an option set, like you name it, and then you're going to have records within that are text that are called options, and Bubble also calls them displays in some places. So the reason we're talking about this is because in our scope here, we're going to have two different kinds of user types. And the best way to store that in the database is not in a data type, but is in an option set because it's limited amount of information and it's never going to change. And we want to be able to set that and have it available quickly and easily throughout the app. Option sets are text-based. They do not refer to records in the database outside of themselves. They can only be created here in the back end, so as a user of the Bubble editor. So they have options or displays, which are of type text, and then they also have attributes. And an attribute looks very similar to what we were just talking about as a field, right? So each of these options that are display of text here can have multiple attributes, and the attributes can be named and have a data type, just like, and can be made singular or a list, just like you would have in a field in a data type or a data table. So next up on our list is we want to go ahead and name our data types and our option sets. So by going through this process, we'll get everything set up so we won't have to keep going back and forth back to the database and back into the design or the workflows as we go. So the very first step is to take a look at our scope, go down to our database and our data types, and make sure that we have each of these kinds of data types named. So I'm going to pull this over to my other screen, and we already have the user data type, so now we also need our app settings. Now, a little bit of convention as we're going through this. You'll notice that I say app settings plural here, and this is one of the only times that I will ever do that when I'm in the database, name a data table in the plural. The reason is because as we're building our expressions of logic in Bubble, it's going to make it a lot easier for us to read those expressions if we keep the data tables mostly named in the singular. But app settings is a little bit different. I know for my app settings, we're only going to have one record, and it's going to be a collection of fields that represent our app's settings. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it plural. So that's one of them. Then we're also going to want to have a profile, but it'll be singular, and lead, and interest. Now, why would I create the names first instead of just starting with the fields that I want for each one? And the reason is because often I'll need to refer to another data table record in a particular data type field. So you'll see that in a moment. It's easier for me to go ahead and create all of the data types first and worry about their fields later. Now, it's also easier for us to move from naming our data types to naming our option sets before moving on and setting attributes and fields. So for our option sets, one of the things I'm a stickler about a little bit is let's just go ahead and keep things consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a capital D for data here, and I'm going to put a suffix on it, option set, so OS for option set. This is going to help me differentiate what data I'm talking about in my dynamic menus and drop downs as I'm working with data in my app. The other one that I'm going to need here is going to be role OS. And then I'm not sure if we're going to get into it in this tutorial, but I'm going to go ahead and set it up the yes/no inclusive, and then put OS at the back of it. So we've named our data types in our option sets. So you can see we should have 5 data tables, and you should have 3 option sets. I don't mention the third one in the scope because it will be irrelevant after we finish building. It was just used for the template. But you should have these 3 option sets and these 5 data tables. Now we're going to talk about adding fields to our data types. I'm going to start with come in here, and we'll start with our app settings. So the fields that I want to have in my app settings table are app name of type text and logo of type image. So I'm going to pop into my app settings, and I'm going to create a new field, and I'm going to call it app name, and it'll be of type text, and then logo, and it will be of type image. And that sets us up for the app settings. The next one on our list is going to be our user table. And so I'm going to just mark the fields done. So we want in our user field, we're going to have an inactive of type yes/no, profile of type profile, role of type role OS. So in our user here, we're going to start with our inactive question mark. This is a shorthand that I use. Whenever I use a question mark in a field name, I am indicating to myself that it is a Boolean or a yes/no field. And that means I can ask myself, hey, is this true or false? Is this yes or no? And as I do that, something that you can do, I don't always do this, and it's the reason why I do this inactive instead of making this an active field, is Bubble has to know whether it's true or false. So even if I don't put a value in that field, Bubble's going to treat that as a no. Right? So I can say here that the default is no, but Bubble would do that automatically because if I don't put anything in there, it would be treated as no. So I name it inactive because I want inactive no to be the default rather than active no be the default. Next, I'm going to do a profile field. So this is why we named all of our tables before we added the fields, because if I had started with trying to name the field profile, I wouldn't have the profile here in this list as a reference if I hadn't already named it. So this is going to be a reference where each standard user that we create is going to own a profile, and this is going to be creating the placeholder for the reference of that profile. And last but not least, I'm going to need a role. This is also why we created our option sets before we created our fields, because I need to refer to the option set that I created called role in order to have that reference field. And I could set a default here as well, but I'm not going to. We're going to have to, when we create the user, we're going to have to specify whether they're admin or standard, so I'm not going to set a default here. I think that's it for our user table. So we've got all of our user fields. And now let's move into our profile, which is the heaviest data table. By heavy, what I mean is every data record, as we were talking about before, is a row in our table, and it contains information for each of these fields. Now, it could be empty, or it could have some information in it. At its core, all of these fields reduce down to text. It's just if we specify a content type, Bubble knows to do different things with the kind of text that we're storing in these fields. When I call a data type or a data table heavy, what I mean is it has a lot of fields, and it could mean that a particular field is going to contain a lot of text. The heavier a field is, or the heavier a record is, the longer it takes for Bubble to serve that information back to us or send that information back to us from the server. All right, so going back into the profile, we have a number of fields that we're going to need to do. The first one is going to be an owner field. Our owner field is going to be of type user, which is going to be a reference to another record in the database here. And this is going to be the same user who owns the particular profile that we're talking about. So this is what we call cross-referencing. So a standard user is going to own a profile, and a profile is going to belong to an owner that is of type user. And this kind of cross-referencing, we do a lot of redundant cross-referencing in Bubble, and the reason is it makes it easier to work with the data later on. So our next field is we're going to have a first name, if I can type correctly, first name of type text. Then we're going to have last name of type text. Then we're going to have what's called first last of type text. The reason we do this is the first last field is going to be the first name concatenated with the last name with a space in between. And the reason we would want to store that twice in here is because it's going to be easier as we're working with the data in our database to refer to a profile's first last as opposed to a profile's first name, then putting in a space and going back in and putting another expression for the profile's last name. After the first last, we're going to have bio of type text. Then we're going to have interest. Note that the S here is this is indicating that it's going to be a list. So we're going to go in here and reference the interest data table, and we're going to check the checkbox that it's going to be a list. It's important to pay attention as you're creating these things, because you cannot change whether it's a list or a singular piece of data after you click create. If you accidentally create interest and you forget to check this box, then you'll need to remove the data type and add back a new one that is a list. Next up, we have a company field, which is going to be of type text. We have years at company, which is going to be of type number. Then we have resume, which will be of type file. And we're going to have reference letters, which will be of type file, and it will be a list. So the S here indicates that it's going to be a list. Then I think I forgot to put one here, which would be a profile picture, which is going to be of type image. And that should do it for the fields for our profile. Oh, I didn't forget to put it up here. I just forgot to add it in. So, all right, we've got these all complete, and then just complete this. Next, we're going to do the interest table. So we're going to have a name, and I'm going to make this one consistent. We're going to say inactive, and the inactive will be yes, no. So if we go to our interest, we'll have name of type text and inactive of type yes, no. And finally, we're going to have a lead, and a lead is only going to have an email field. So you'll see here, we can mark these fields are done, and then email of type text. And that's it for our fields for all of our data types. So we have finished adding our fields to our data types. And just so you know, it is typical for us to add new fields as we go, as we're building and realize that we need to store something in the database. But this will just help us prevent that back and forth. So now we want to add some attributes to our option sets. And really, we only have one option set where we're going to be utilizing attributes, which is going to be this yes, no inclusive. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here to the yes, no inclusive, into the role. And first we're going to add the options to the role. So we're going to have an app admin, and we're also going to have a standard. And then in the yes, no inclusive, we're going to have a yes, no, and yes or no. And then when we do the attributes, we're only going to have attributes for our yes, no inclusive. So the attributes that we're going to have is going to say list of yes, no's, and it's going to be of type yes, no, and it's going to be a list. Now this isn't going to make much sense until we're filtering lists of information on the front end. So, but I want to show you how to create the attribute and that it exists as an option for you to do in your option sets. So each of our yes, no, and yes or no options are going to have a list of yes, no's. So now I'm going to come in and modify the attributes of the yes. I'm going to add yes to the list for yes, and I'm going to modify the attribute for no, and I'm going to add no to the list for no. And then I'm going to do both yes and no. So yes, add, and no, add. Remember to click the add button here when you're working with lists, because if you just select it in the drop down, then you click save, it won't actually save it until you click the add and then save. Okay, so our database is fully set up. We have all of our data types and all of their fields and all of our option sets with their options and attributes. So we have finished up structuring our database by adding options and attributes to our option sets. And as part of that, we created the app admin and the standard users. So we're done with both of these things now. So we can mark the database done and we can mark the user types done. And we'll revisit more about the user types as we go. Now we're going to talk about privacy and security. And you might be wondering why we aren't actually moving things around on the screen and displaying it and previewing it yet. I know this is a lot of setup work, but it really does save us quite a bit of time as we're building, so we don't have to go back and forth. And privacy rules in particular are especially important because I've seen so many times where people don't add any privacy or security to their apps until the very end, and they get everything working, and then they institute privacy rules and they end up breaking their app and have a whole bunch of bugs that they have to go in and spend a lot of time cleaning up. And it's very frustrating because you think you're about to launch, and then you implement privacy rules and suddenly you're another week or more away from launching. So let's just go ahead and knock them out. The rule of thumb is to create the strictest privacy rules as possible from the beginning and then let up on them as you go. And that will give you a great place to start in protecting your app against accidental data leaks, especially to bad actors. So we're going to start with the privacy rules for each of our data types like we did when we were creating the fields. So let's take a look at our privacy rules for the app settings. The app settings actually should be publicly visible, and they are by default here. So when I click on here, it takes me to this privacy tab for the app settings. And we don't want to add any rules here because we want everyone to know the name of the app and see the logo of the app. That's fine. It should be public. So let's just go ahead and mark the app settings as done because our privacy rule is publicly visible. All right, and then we've got, I marked the wrong thing, complete. Now we're going to do the user's privacy rules. So you can see the user table already has privacy rules applied. This was applied by Bubble. Bubble knows that the user data table is particularly important to protect, and so they start you out with the default rule that the user's own data can only be seen by that user. So the way they wrote this is this user, meaning whichever user record we're talking about, and trying to determine who has permission to see it. If this user record is the current user who's using the app, then they should be able to see everything, right? And I'm going to take this one step further, and you might let up on this in certain circumstances, but not for this app. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to say, let's call this the owner field, because this is whoever owns this record. So this user is current user, and then I'm going to say, and current user is logged in. Now this is part superstitious and overly protective, but I've seen a lot of great bubblers use this as extra protection against anyone seeing data that they're not supposed to see. So this says if the user record in question is the current user who's using the app and the current user is logged in, then they can see the information. Otherwise, no one else can see anything else. Now we also want to add in here, according to our scope, we want to say, hey, the owner can and the app admin can as well. So let's go ahead and add an admin rule. So we'll say admin. And the way that we know a user is an admin is through the user tables field called role. Here. So what we're going to write here is we're going to say, hey, when the current user who is using the app, when their role is app admin and the current user is logged in, then they can see everything. And so this will just make sure that admins and the owners of the user record can see sensitive information like the email address of the user, but no one else can. And this is especially important because even just a couple months ago, there was a hacker who decided to hack into a whole bunch of Bubble apps, and they were able to determine all of the users' emails and a whole bunch of stuff that they weren't supposed to. So we want to make sure your app is not susceptible to that. So now I think we're done with adding the privacy rules for the user. We just want the app admin and owner, and everyone else is out of luck. They don't have any permissions. So we can consider our user table complete and protected. So now let's move to the profile. So for the profile, we want an app admin rule and an owner rule, and these will stay pretty consistent throughout the app. We want the app owner to see the app admin to see everything and the owner to see everything. So if you recall, when we created our profile, I also created an owner field of type user. So because the profile can never be the current user because those are two different record types, you can't say, hey, if this profile is the current user, but you can refer to the profile's owner. So let's go ahead and create an owner field. And we can say, hey, when this profile's owner is the current user and the current user is logged in, then they can see everything about this profile. And so now I want to uncheck this because I don't want everyone else to be able to see everything else. I want to uncheck this and make sure that anyone who's logged out doesn't have any permissions to see the profiles. So I'm also going to add here the app admin. So the app admin should be able to do things as well. So we'll go and define a rule called admin. And this one's not going to be based on this profile. So this is going to be identical to the other admin. We're going to say, hey, when the current user's role is app admin and the current user is logged in, then they should be able to see everything. But we're not quite done yet because we also want to be able to have, if they're logged in, they should be able to view some fields, right? And find in searches and view attached files. So if the other user is logged in, we want them to be able to see the profile picture, first name, bio, interests, company, and years of company. So I'm going to drag this to the side, and we're going to make a rule called logged in. And we're going to say, hey, when the current user is logged in, we're going to uncheck the view all fields, which is going to give us the ability to check specific fields we want to share. So the first one we want to share would be the picture field. Be careful because Bubble is a little bit weird and puts the checkboxes to the right, and it makes it a little bit tricky because sometimes it's like, oh, you think you're sharing the picture here, but actually that's the owner. So we want picture shared, we want the first name shared, we want the bio shared, we want the interests shared, the company, and the years of company. Right? So now the admin can see everything, logged in users can see particular things, and the owner can see everything, and logged out users cannot see anything. And so we can go ahead and consider that our profile is done. Now let's go to our interests. Our interests, we're going to want logged in users to be able to see everything and logged out users not to be able to see anything. So if we go into our interests, we'll define a logged in rule. And we'll say when current user is logged in, they can see everything and everyone else can see nothing. So now our interest table is protected. And finally, we want to protect our leads. We want the app admin to be able to see everything, but everyone else can see nothing for our leads. So we'll create an admin rule. And we can say current user's role is app admin and current user is logged in. I can view all fields, find searches, and no one else can do anything with that information. All right, our app is secure and ready to go. So let's get started with our building. We have finished our conversation and setting up our privacy rules and security for the app, which means that we are done with the pre-work of doing our database entirely. We have all of our data types and their fields and privacy rules and all of our option sets and their displays and attributes. So we'll go ahead and mark the database done, and we can actually go ahead and mark the template, tutorial objective, app purpose, and user types all done. We've got all of that handled now. So now we're just going to tackle the rest of the scope page by page, starting with our index page. So if you open up in the scope, the index, first we are wanting to understand what we're doing on that page. What is that page for? This one we're going to use as a switchboard. So no one is going to stay on this page. When they get to the page, the app is going to have different rules of where to send the user based on their logged in and logged out status, their active status, and their user role. So the title of this page is going to just be the name of the app, which would be the who's who, and I'm just going to add the word directory here. And permissions, again, nobody's going to have permission to stay on the app. And then there's really not any sections in the elements part. We're just going to have a blank screen, and we're going to tell the app where to send the user based on these things here, these parameters up here. Right? So to get there, we're going to go into the design tab. So now I'm in the design tab of my index page. So if you ever want to switch which page you're working on in Bubble, you click the page selector here. This gives you the option to go into a specific page or what's called a reusable, or if we had our backend workflows enabled, you see them here. Now I'm on the index page, and the first thing I see that we can do on this page according to our scope is going to be to name it. We want to give it the title Who's Who Directory. To do that, when I'm on this design tab, what I'm looking at is the collection of elements that are interacting on the page with the user. So the user can see or not see the elements that are on this page. We're going to hide some, show others, and they're going to have some logic in terms of hiding and showing things and what can happen on the page. And that's coming down in here into all of these different kinds of elements that we can put on the page. Well, the top level element itself is the page called index. And if I want to open the what's called the properties editor for this, I can just click on it from the elements tree, or I could search for it here in the elements search. Or if I go between the build canvas and the sidebar here and double click, it will also open the top page element. And you'll notice in the properties editor, and sometimes you'll hear me call it the dark gray box, that we have something called the page title that we can set here. And so this right now, if I preview the page, I want to see what it looks like with this as the title. I can click preview, and Bubble will load this page. Remember, it's a blank page, and you can see up at the top it says Bubble Pipe no-code apps. And here it matches what's put in this page title. So I'm just going to change this to Who's Who Directory. And I can either click the preview button again, or I can go ahead and go to the tab and just click the update bar here. And now it says Who's Who Directory. So there we have it. We've done our very first part of our app here. So we can go ahead and mark this complete, and we can mark this one complete. So our permissions, none of our users are going to be able to stay on this page because we don't want them on a blank page. They can't really do anything from a blank page. So we don't need to set up any button clicks or anything like that. We just need to set up some workflows, and that's going to bring us to this tab. This is a collection of things that are going to happen when the user interacts with our page somehow. In this case, they're not actually going to interact with the page before we're going to do some things. We're going to click here to add an event, and then we're going to click here when the page is loaded, and then we're going to put in some actions of what to do when the page is loaded based on what we know about our users. So if we're looking at our scope, we know that when the user is active and an admin, we want to direct them to the admin portal. Now, we're fortunate. We're working in a design template where all of our pages have already been set up for the design for us. We don't really need to worry about that too much. So we already have our admin portal here created and ready to go. Now, the difference is that if I was doing this from scratch, I'd probably want to go ahead and make placeholders for all of the pages just to be able to do this, or come back and do this part later once I have all of those pages. Because just like with our data here, if I'm trying to add a profile field to my user, but I haven't created the profile yet, it won't be available for me to connect it to. So the same goes for the workflows. If I don't have the page to navigate the user to yet, I won't be able to create the workflow properly. So the first one for the app admin, if we look at the user and the user is logged in and they're active and they're admin users, we're going to send them to the admin portal. So I'm going to create an action here. We're going to go to the navigation menu and we're going to choose Go to Page. And the destination is going to be the admin portal. And we're only going to send the user there when the current user is logged in and the current user's inactive is no, right? Meaning that they're active. And the current user's role is app admin. Now I want to copy this action and do something very similar. So I'm just going to copy. I cut instead, so I'm going to go ahead and paste. And then I'm going to paste again. So we're going to copy and paste that. And then we're going to change this around a little bit to accommodate our standard user. So we've already done this one. When our user is logged in and they're active standard user, then they're going to go to the portal page, right? So I'm going to switch the destination to the portal page. This current user is logged in and current user's inactive is no, and current user's role is standard, then they're going to go to the portal. Then if I go back to my scope once more, we can mark this as done. We're going to say, hey, if they're inactive, I want them to go to the 404 page. So I can, again, paste and just change this to the destination. It's going to change the 404 page. We'll say current users logged in and current users inactive is yes. And then it doesn't matter what their role is. So when we're building expressions, this is called a dynamic expression in Bubble, specifically a conditional dynamic expression. So when I'm backspacing, I need to go until I can't see the last part of the statement and then click out of it and I'll see the whole thing. So when the current user is logged in and the current user's inactive is yes, then they're going to be sent to the 404 page. Ultimately, this is going to give our app admins the ability to mark a user as inactive and have them be sent to the 404 page. All right, so I think we have one more that we need to accommodate, which is when the user is logged out, we want to send the user to the home page. So if I go and I add one more time, I want to add the home page here, and I'll go ahead and clear this expression because this will be a little bit easier than backspacing, and just say if the current user is logged out, that they're going to go to the home page, right? So now when I preview this page, I'm currently logged out. There's no user in our database to be logged into, right? So if I go into my data tab, my app data, and I'm looking at all users here, I don't have any users in my user data table, so it's not possible for me to be logged in. So when I click the preview, or when I refresh this page, because I'm logged out, it should send me to the home page instead, which is exactly what we want. And it's exactly where we need to go next. So we are pretty much done with the index page because we went ahead and completed this. And so this is all done. This is all done. So all of our sections are done. And I would mark the whole page complete, except I know for one thing, we're going to come back and refactor the title. So I'm going to mark the title as incomplete, but we are going to come back to it and finish it later on. And the reason is because we want to make this dynamically populated from the database, and we're just not quite there yet. Right? So I'm going to leave the index undone, but we're going to move on into the home page. Now the home page, go ahead and switch this, or go to our page selector here and choose home. So our home page, the purpose is for logged out users to make an informed decision about interacting with the app. We're going to give a logged out user the option to create an account or sign up, depending on whether we're on mobile or desktop. We call them different things, or to log in if they're already a user. And we're going to give them the ability to sign up for a list to receive more information about the app over time. So that's our home page, and that's what the purpose of our home page is. The title of this page is going to be the app name, so the Who's Who directory, and then a pipe, and then the name home. So we'll go ahead and do that. We should remember how to do that. So I'm just going to double click here and bring up the page element called home, and I'm going to call this the Who's Who directory. Home. Perfect. And again, I'm not going to mark that one complete because we're going to come back and refactor this later. The permissions for this page, only logged out users can remain on this page, which means that if the user is logged in, we need to send them to a different page. Specifically, if they're logged in and they are an admin and active, they need to go to the admin portal, just the same what we did on the index page. But to make things simpler this time, we're going to create a similar workflow. We're going to go to General and Pages Loaded. And then we're going to detect whether the user is logged in or not. If they're not logged in, we're not going to do anything. We're going to leave them. If they are logged in, right, we're going to send them to the index page. Right? So only when the current user is logged in, then we will send them to the index page. Because remember, the index page already knows what to do with the user if they're logged in. It tells whether they're active in admin, active in standard, or inactive. And it will send them to where they need to go. Right? So we've taken care of the permissions part of our home page now. And now we have the sections. So we have a header section. So the header section is supposed to look like this. Create account, login, sign up. And then I have some instructions here for how it's supposed to look on different screens. So the hamburger menu icon button should be hidden. We shouldn't have that available on the home page. The user picture and chevron button here should also be hidden. The Create Account button should only be visible when the page is bigger than 800 pixels. The Sign Up button should only be visible when it's less than 800 pixels, and we'll need to accommodate 800 specifically, so one of these will have to be equal then. Navigates user to the page. The Create Account is going to send them to the login page in a specific way. The sign up will also do the same thing. The login button is going to send them to the same page, but with a different set of parameters so that we know what to do with them. All right, so in order to make elements visible and not visible on the screen, we can do that from the page load perspective. So if I'm on my page here and I go to my group that's containing my chevron icon here. So notice when I click on the chevron icon, it brings up the property editor for that particular element. If I click just outside of it, I get a group here that is around both this picture and the chevron, right? So both of these things, these should not be visible when the page is loaded on the home page. So I'm going to go ahead and come into my properties editor, specifically into my layout section, and I'm going to uncheck the box here that says this element is visible on page load, and that's going to hide it. And I don't think I'm going to collapse it right now. I think I'm going to leave it in its place when it's hidden, so it won't shift everything over. It'll just leave it right where it is. Right. I also want to hide this this icon here, the hamburger menu icon. In the same way, I'm just going to, from the layout of the property editor for this element, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck. I'm going to uncheck this element is visible on page load. Now I want to do something similar for our buttons as described in our scope. So we can say we've already hidden our hamburger menu and our user picture with chevron. Those are hidden on page load. We can no longer see them. Now on the create account button, I want to see that on the desktop. And if it's less than 800, I want to see it say sign up instead. So from here, for create account, I'm going to right click on this element and select its first parent, and that's the whole thing. So this button itself is not currently in its own group. So I'm just going to uncheck this element is visible on page load. And now I have to tell Bubble, hey, when the page is greater than or equal to 800 pixels, I want this button to show up on the page. I do that in another place called conditional, the conditional menu in the properties editor. So I come into this here and I'm going to define another condition. And essentially what the condition is saying is, hey, I'm going to say a statement here, and if that statement is true, then whatever I say to change is going to happen. So right now, the element is not visible, and I'm going to make a statement that says, when the current page width is greater than or equal to 800, then I want this element to be visible and this checkbox should be checked. All right, so now we've done this part. So let's just see where we are right now on this page. I'm going to preview the page, and you can see I can't see the user in the chevron, and I can't see the hamburger menu, but I can see the create account. And the reason I can see the create account is I'm currently on a 32-inch monitor, so it's greater than 800 pixels. I can also see the login and sign up because I haven't done anything with those yet. So now what I want to do is I want to hide the sign up unless the page is less than 800 pixels. So I'm going to come to the sign up button. Then I'm going to do the same thing. In the layout here, I'm going to uncheck the box that it's visible on page load. And in the conditional, I'm going to write here, when the page width, current page width, is less than 800, then I want this button to be visible. And so if I go and I refresh my page, you can see my sign up button is missing, but my create account button is still there because the page is wider. And now if I right click and I click inspect, I'm going to be able to mimic using here, there's this little icon right here that's supposed to mean desktop versus mobile. This is going to allow me to simulate a mobile phone view, and you can see my sign up shows. I'm just going to refresh the page so it kind of recenters itself. So you can see the sign up button shows because the width of the page is less than 800. I could also just choose the responsive version here in this menu, and that allows me to kind of see how it behaves at several different, like as we go down in pixels and up in pixels. All right, so that's working exactly as we wanted it to. Let's go back to our scope, and we can say create account button is visible greater than 800 and sign up button is visible on mobile or less than 800. So now what we want to do is we want to navigate the user to the login page set to the sign up sequence for the create account button and also for the sign up button. These should both do the same exact action. So we're going to come here to the create account button, and we're going to come back into what's called the appearance tab, and we're going to add a workflow. When this button is clicked, we want to navigate, which we've already done. We've already learned how to navigate users. So we're going to go to page, and we're going to go to the login page. And right now, we don't have a way to tell the person what kind of mode we want the login page to be when they get there. We haven't set that up yet on the login page. So we'll come back to this later. We'll navigate more specifically later. You'll notice that we have to do some refactoring. It's very tricky because you'll have to create something in another place in order to utilize it in the place where you're currently building. So there's a bit of back and forth, and I'll try to point that out. So that's for when we click the create account button. We're also going to want to do the same thing for the sign up button. So we'll click here to navigate, go to page, and we're going to send them to the login page. And technically, that's also what we want to do for this login button. So far, there's no difference between these three buttons in terms of what they do. They're all going to navigate, go to page, and go to the login. And if we go back to our scope, this is as close as we can get it for now because we don't have the ability to set to sign up or versus login when they get there. So we'll have to come back and refactor this later. So I won't mark these complete just yet. Now we're going to come to the main page section. So this is what the main page looks like. We've got a picture on the left. We've got the title here and some body text here. And then we have an input and a button for entering an email address and clicking the button to join the list. So if we look at how the pages are constructed with different elements, we've got the visual elements are just showing things. This right now is an image, and I don't think we've got any text, but here, this is a text element. So Michael, when he was creating the template, he drew a text element on the page and he filled it in with some text here. And this is what we would call hard-coded text. Just like our title for our pages, we just type the text in here and that's what shows up on the page. The same for here, for this paragraph, it's just a text element and it has a style on it to say what we want the font to look like and how we want it to be styled. And we just entered some text into it. Here, looking at this element for inputting an email address, this is called an input form. And this is just a regular input and it's set the content to be expecting an email. This means that it's going to need to have the @ symbol and also a period or a dot in there to separate the text from the extension, so the domain from its extension. So here, we don't really need to do anything because Michael already set that up for us in the template. So we already have the input here. It's already labeled with everything we're expecting, and it's already set to the right type. But when I click the button, I need to do something. So if I go to my scope, and I check it out, it says, hey, the user can see the copy, the title and the text, and the user can enter their email, which that's already done. Now when the user clicks the join list button, we're going to need to create a new lead in the database and then send a welcome email to the person who was added to the list, and then open a pop-up to ask the user to check their email. So we don't even know just from looking at this page Like right here, we don't even really know that there's a pop-up there. And so we come over here, and I'm not even sure we have the pop-up built. I think we don't have the pop-up built exactly. So we probably have to add the pop-up ourselves, which is no big deal. Let's just go ahead and do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the lead to the database, because that's what our scope tells us, to create a new lead in the database. So we'll come here, we'll add the workflow, and now we're going to use a different section of our drop-down menu here. We're going to come to the data section, and we're going to create a new thing. So when we were creating our data types, I was telling you that our data tables, each row is a record. Well, Bubble also calls each row a thing in the database. So that's where that language is coming from. So we're going to create a new thing. The type of thing that we're going to create is the lead type. And then I like the shortcut of clicking this button to add all fields. That way I don't forget to add any fields that I'm supposed to add. I can just delete the ones that I don't need. In this case, there is only one field. It's the email field. So I want to add something into the email field. Well, what I want to add is from this email input here, which is called input email join mailing list. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to be shown a menu of things that I could add data here. Right? So if I just wanted to type in an email address, I could say something like Tanya@pronocoders.com, and that would be hard-coded, but that's not very useful because I don't already know the person's address. So I'm going to want to click into this part. So if I, in here, insert dynamic data, and now I have the ability to find the input email join mailing list and that value. So when we use an input form on our page, it automatically creates a container for information that's going to be called that input's value. And that's the value that I want to populate here. Then the next thing I have on my scope to do, because that's done, is send an email to that email address. So the very next step here is we're going to come down to email and send email, and the 2 is going to be the same value as that input. So that input's value. The sender name, we can say, is going to be who's who directory, and then the subject is welcome to the list, and we can say thank you for joining our mailing list. Right? Now this is utilizing the built-in email functionality of Bubble, which goes through SendGrid, and you are limited to 20 emails being sent from your app per day, regardless of whichever plan you're on. So it's going to be imperative to learn how to connect your app with another email provider or with your own SendGrid account. We're not going to cover that in this video, but that is covered in No Code Schools videos. All right, so now we've done our second thing that we needed to do here. So this part is complete. And now we need to open a pop-up asking the user to check their email. So in order to create a pop-up, we're going to come back onto the design. This was not created for us already, so we're going to add it. A pop-up is considered a container. So when I was looking at our picture and the chevron here, I said that they are, let me just see if I can come in here into the header. When I was looking at the chevron and the picture, I said, hey, I'm going to hide the group that's around them. So the group is a container. Then a repeating group is a container for a list of things. A pop-up is going to be a container that's going to show up in the middle and near the top of the page, no matter where you are on the page. It's going to be right in the middle, in the forefront. A floating group can be floating to the top or to the bottom or either side. A group focus is going to be anchored to another element and showing. And then sometimes you can install more types of containers, usually through plugins. So what we're going to want to do is create our own pop-up. So I'm just going to click on pop-up, and then I'm going to click and drag about the size that I want the pop-up to be. And really, it's not going to need to be very big because we're just going to ask the user to check their email. And so now I have the pop-up. I'm going to name the pop-up. Pop-up, check your email. And I'm going to use a little bit of text here. And I'm going to say, thank you for joining our email list. Please check your email. And I'm going to just drag this. Now, if I want this to be responsive, right now it's not responsive because the pop-up itself is considered fixed. So it's always going to be 267 pixels wide and 183 pixels high. So I'm going to make it a column instead. And then I'm going to uncheck this button and make the max width 300 and leave the min width 0. And we'll talk more about this later when we get into explaining how to do design. And then the minimum height, I just want to fit it to content. So I'll just take this and make it the minimum height 0. And then what I want to do is I want to put some padding. So I want 30 at the top, 30 at the bottom, 30 left, and 30 right. And now I have a well-organized pop-up. And then for the text itself, I just want to make it centered. There we go. And this element is not centered. You can see it's off to the left because there's, 48 pixels on this side, but 30 here. So I'm going to come into the layout section and I'm just going to do horizontal alignment in the center. Now I have a pop-up that I can show in my workflow. So I can send the email and then I can come down to element actions and I'm going to show, and I'm going to show the pop-up. All right, so we have done quite a bit of building. Now it's time to test. So I'm going to preview my page. And I'm just going to take this debug mode off. So if you just highlight from where it says true all the way to just beyond the question mark, then you'll get an accurate sense of what the page is going to look like on the screen. So I'm going to type in my email address. And I'm going to click the button to join the list. And it's going to show me the pop-up. Thank you for joining our email list. Please check your email. So the first thing I need to check to make sure everything worked properly is our database. I'm going to come into data, into app data, and I'm going to choose lead. And you can see I have one lead with the email address that I entered. And it'll tell you the date that it was created, the date that it was last modified. So that part worked. And then you can tell that the pop-up worked. And now I just need to see if the email part worked. So I'm going to come down to my email box, and you're going to have to pardon the mess of my email. I have many, many unread messages. So the Who's Who directory, welcome to the list. Thank you for joining our mailing list. So I think we can check off that everything is working as intended according to our scope. We've got all of these are complete and we've tested it and they're working. So we can mark this all as complete. We will just need to come back and refactor the navigation to the login page in sign up versus login mode, and we'll need to refactor the title. So we won't mark it as quite complete yet, but we'll get there. And now it's time to move to the login page. So we've done as much as we can with the index and the home page before we go back and refactor, but we still need to do a few things before we can do that. So before we start in on the login page, I want to scroll back up to the things that we're going to learn today and talk about the forms and data types. So in our home page, we accepted the information of an email address and we were able to store that in the database, and that's part and parcel of capturing and storing information. Now we're going to take that to a new level when we go into our login page. So we'll just do our page selector and choose login and go into the design. And so you can see on our login page, we have our header as we did before. We've got a sign up section, a login section, a reset password, and create profile sections. And so this is taking the input of data and storing it in the database, or doing something else with that information to a different level than just a simple email input and storing that one thing in the database. So let's get started. So we're going to go to our scope and into the login, and we can see that the purpose of the login page is for logged out users to sign up or log into the app. The title is going to be the app name and then the pipe and login. So we'll come into the design, we'll open this up, and we'll say who's who directory and login. And then next we need to, so let's mark this complete. That's complete. Well, actually, we'll leave this because we're going to come back and refactor. The permission here is only logged out users and users without profiles can remain on this page. So a user that is logged in and has a profile should not be able to stay on this page. We're going to need to send those users back to the index page. So we'll come to our workflow here, and on pages loaded, we're going to navigate, and we're going to send the user, having a little bit trouble. There we go. So navigate, go to page, and we're going to choose the index, and we're only going to do this when the current user is logged in and the current user's profile is not empty. So if the current user already has a profile, then they've already been through the sign up process and they don't need to log in. And so if those two things are accurate, then we're going to kick them back to the index. The index is going to determine what kind of user they are, and it's going to send them to the appropriate place. So I just want to point out the reason we do that index is so we don't have to keep redoing the workflows. There is another way of doing this through the header, but so far we haven't done the header as a reusable, which is more of an advanced topic. So we're just going to do it this way through the index for now. All right, so now we have that part of the scope taken care of. So the permissions is done. Now let's look at the sections. So in the header, same header as before, same opportunities. We're going to hide the hamburger menu again. We're going to hide the chevron button and picture. The create account button is going to be hidden. The sign up button is going to be hidden, and the login button is going to be hidden. So essentially the only thing we want left on the header is just going to be the logo up here. So I'm going to come into the design, and I'm going to take the whole group that is around these three buttons, and I'm going to come to the layout. I'm going to uncheck this element is visible on page load. I'm also going to do that for the hamburger icon and for the group around the picture and chevron. All right, so now none of those things will show on the page, and I can test that by clicking preview. All right, so I don't have anything up at the top here in the header except for the logo. Now I want to create a sign-up sequence. For the sign-up sequence, as we explained before, all Bubble apps have a user table. And the user is the record of the person who is signing up and interacting with the app. And so the user data type comes with a built-in field called the email field, and that's how we tell different users apart. So the first thing I need in order to create a user is I need to know the email address that we're going to store in the email field to differentiate that user from all of the other users. So I have the input here, which was created by Michael, called the email input, and I'm just going to put in here to identify it for the sign up form, because I also have an email input down here, but that's for the login form. Then I'm going to have a password. So the default authentication for Bubble is through an email with a password, but you'll notice that the password doesn't show a field here, and that's because it's a hidden field that no one has access to except to input and change the password if you are an authenticated user. So it's sort of a private field to Bubble. Only Bubble gets to see it, and it's hashed so you can't even decrypt the passwords. So there's a special field or a special input called the password input. So when I type in here, it's not going to show me the letters. It's just going to hide whatever I'm typing in here. And then because people often will type a password and maybe there was a typo or something went wrong, we'll just make them confirm it to make sure that they typed it in correctly and get these two things to match up. And then they will be able to, we're going to hide these for now. We're not going to worry about these two checkboxes for the moment. And then we're going to click the sign up button. And the sign up button is going to go ahead and sign them up with a new account if they don't already have an account with this email. All right, so we don't have to worry about setting up the inputs. They're already set up. We'll just rename the password input for sign up, and then the confirm password, we'll say confirm password input and then sign up so that we know which ones they are. And then when we click the sign up button, we're going to add the workflow. And it's under account, and it's the very first one, sign the user up. And the email that we use will be the email input signups value. The password will be the password input signups value. And the require a password confirmation, we're going to go ahead and check that. And then the confirmation will be the confirm password input signups value. We'll go ahead and say, yes, we want to remember the email. This will prevent our user from having to enter their email every time they arrive back on the page. It's done through local storage on their browser. And we're going to change some other fields. So I'm going to add all fields here so I don't forget any. When we are signing up a user, by default, we want their inactive to be set to no. We won't have a profile to put here yet, so I'll go ahead and delete that one. And then we know if they're signing themselves up, we want them to be a standard user, not an app admin. And then I'm just going to come back in here, and I'm going to hide the agree to terms of service. Sorry about that. So we're going to hide the agreement to terms and conditions in the privacy policy. I'm going to take the group that is around both the checkbox and the text, and I'm going to make it not visible on page load and to be collapsed when it's hidden. And I'll do the same thing with the next one here. I want it to be not visible on page load and collapsed when hidden. So if I preview, now I have the sign up form and I have the sign up button, and I can go ahead and enter an email. So we'll sign up with mytanyaMcGar@gmail.com. The password, we could put whatever we like. And I'm going to go ahead and click the sign up. Now, nothing else is going to happen on the page to indicate that I was signed up. We haven't given Bubble any more information on what to do, but I can go to my database and check to see if it worked. So you can see I didn't used to have a user here, and now I do with the email that I used to sign up. And the password that I used to sign up, although you won't be able to see the password anywhere. Okay, so that handles the sign up, but what about the login? So now I am signed up and I'm also logged in, because when I do a sign up action, at the end of it, if it's successful, the user is automatically signed in. And I can tell this by some logic on my page, so I'll just do this to demonstrate. I'm going to come up here and in this header section, just add a little bit of text, and I'm just going to insert the current user's logged in. And if I'm logged in, it will say yes, and if I'm not logged in, it will say no. So if I refresh, it says I'm logged in. So in order to log back out, I'm going to want to show, I'll want to put a workflow, a temporary workflow on this here, because as we're testing this page, it's going to be easier if I can just log out. So let me go to this text that I put here, and I'm going to add a workflow, and when I click it, I'm going to log the user out. And so I click, and now I'm not logged in. It's not showing anything because I'm not logged in. So next, I would need to be able to log the user in with their email and the password that they created when they signed up. So I'm going to come down to this section here, and I don't have to do anything with these except rename the input so I can find them more easily. This is the email input for the login section, and this is the password input for the login section. Then when I click the login button, I want to do the second action, so account, and second action is log the user in. So the email will be the email inputs login value, and the password will be the password input logins value. I'll go ahead and leave the stay logged in as true and the remember the email as yes. This will get very annoying as you're testing, but it will be less annoying for your end user once you publish your app live. So I like to go ahead and do that to save the user time. All right. So now I have this one working. I'm going to refresh this page. And you can see it's automatically filled in my email because it said, yes, I wanted to remember the email. And now I'm just going to type in the password. And you'll see that I still have the sign up here, but I'm using specifically the login inputs and button. And now you can see up here, I'm logged in. So I didn't sign up with a new email password. I just logged in with my existing email and password, and now I'm logged in. Right? So now if I wanted to reset the password, I need to take the email and then I need to take the email address and send an email to that email address if they're a user. So I'm going to go ahead and log out and come back to my design. And for my email here, this is the email input, and I'm going to call it reset so I know which one it is. And for the send reset link here, this button, we're going to go to account, and we're going to send password reset email. The email to reset is going to be the email input resets value, and I'm going to leave everything else default here. Right, so I'm going to send an email to that email address, and they'll be able to reset their password by clicking on the link in the email. So I'm going to go to my Who's Who directory login, And now I want to reset the password, generate that reset password email. So I'll enter my email address and I'll click send reset link. Now, I haven't set anything up to show the user that an email has been sent to them. We'll have to do that in a moment. But let's go and see and make sure that we got the email in our inbox. So the Tanya's Who's Who tutorial, your password reset request. So this is what it looks like. Someone, hopefully you, and you can click reset and it will take you to the reset password page. There you go. Now we're going to set up the reset password page, just not yet. We're going to stick to our login page for now, but we know that we're generating the link and the email correctly. So now we need to let the user know, hey, we sent you an email, go check your email. So I'm going to come back into my design and I'm going to look here and I don't see a pop-up or any information here that I can show to the user to say, hey, go check your email. So I just want to double check that and reveal this in the elements tree and just see, so Michael put an alert to show that your password reset email has been sent. So now after I'm done sending the password reset, I need to show an alert. So the element is going to be alert password reset. It looks like we've got 3 of them. So I'm going to come back here. So this is the one that belongs into our reset password group. So I'm going to say, give myself a note here, use this. And then I'm going to find the other ones and delete them because we don't need them. Okay, and now we can take the use this off so we don't get it confused. All right. So now after we reset the email, we're going to show the alert password reset. It's going to fade in. It's going to hold for a couple seconds and then fade out. So just to test that, we'll come in here, we'll enter our email, and we'll click the button, and it's showing to check my email. Perfect. Now we're going to create the profile. So this is going to start using more than just text inputs, right? So far we've just been using a text input set to email, a text input set to password. Now we're going to be using some different inputs, some for just text, some for dates, and so forth. So coming back to my design here, I have the Create Your Profile section. The first input that I encounter is for uploading a profile picture, and it's titled Picture Uploader, which is fine. There's only one on the page. The input first name should be fine. Input last name should be fine. Date time picker A, I think it's the only date time picker, so that should be fine. We could be more specific and say date of birth. The multi-line input bio is named okay. The interest right now, this is a multi-drop-down input, so it's going to be allowing you to select multiple things at the same time. So right now I'm going to say, let's just add some no-code platforms here. We'll use static text choices and we'll say here, let's see, Bubble, Flutterflow, Xano APIs. And add Didify in there. Okay, so now we have some no-code platforms that we can choose from. And the company, and we'll be able to find it from multi-drop-down text interest, so that's fine. So the company is Input Company. This is going to be a single drop-down, so you can only choose one. I actually don't think the input company is supposed to be a drop-down. I think it's just supposed to be a text input. And that's okay, we can make it a text input. I'm going to right-click on the element itself, on the input element. I'm going to replace the element type, and I'm going to choose input. And then I'm going to give it a standard input as a style, and now it's ready to go. So input company is a text input and not a drop-down. Then for the title, input title is fine. Years of company is an integer, and that's fine. This is a file uploader for uploading the resume, and it's file uploader resume, which is named correctly. And this is a multi-file uploader for reference letters, and it's named appropriately. So we don't really have to change much about this form at all. Now we just need to save this information to a profile that belongs to the user. So I'm going to click on the Save button here and add a workflow. And I'm going to create a new thing. And the type is going to be a profile. And I'm going to do the shortcut here and add all of my fields. And so for the bio, I'm just going to type in bio, and it's going to find the input for me. We're looking for the multi-line input bio value. For the company, I'm just going to type company and choose input company's value. For first last, I'm going to go first. So I want input first name value. Then I'm going to click outside of the more. So just to the right of this dotted line border around the more, I'm just going to click. I'm going to type a space, and then I'm going to click on insert dynamic data, and now I will insert the last name. So input last name's value. The first name will just be the first name's value, input first name's value. The interests, now here's where we have a little bit of difference. So what I did was I made this multi-drop down text here. I made these text to show you populating by text, but actually we have a data source here, our data table called interest. So really I want to populate interests in this drop down from the database. So I'm going to leave it for now as static choices, and we're just going to skip it until we get to the point where we are creating interests for the users in the admin portal. So I'm going to just not save it here. So for the last name will be the last name's input last name's value. The owner will be the current user. The picture will be the file uploader. So the picture uploader value. The reference letters is going to be a list. The user will be able to upload more than one letter at a time. So we are going to set the list, and it's going to be the multi-file uploader's value. So when we're working with the list, you can see it doesn't use the equal sign. Instead, it says add, remove, set list, add list, remove list, clear list. If I choose add, then I'm adding one thing to a list of things. If I choose remove, I'm removing one thing from a list of things. If I'm setting the list, then I'm going to clear and add a whole list to it at the same time. If I'm adding a list, then it's going to keep the existing list and add a new list to it. If I remove a list, then it's going to take the existing list and remove a subset of those items from the list. And if I clear the list, it's just going to leave it blank. So for resume, I want the file uploader. And for years of company, I can just type in years and choose input years of company's value. Now you'll notice all of these are blue. And the reason that they're blue and not red is because I know that the bio, I set the bio in the data here for the profile. The bio is set to be a text value, and when I'm in my workflow to create the profile, the multi-line input is a text input. So it's going to put text into a field that is expecting text, right? Conversely, years a company is expecting digits only. So if I was trying to put the multi-line input BIOS value in the years a company, it wouldn't work because the years a company is expecting a number and the bio information would be text. So if I come in here and just to demonstrate, if I try to put the multi-line BIOS value in here, Bubble is going to continue to ask me more because it's going to try to get it to a digit, and it's not going to be able to get to a digit from the multi-line input BIOS value. So I'm going to go back to the years at company, and that's why it's blue. So Bubble does that red. It will leave things red when it either isn't expecting the type of content that you're entering, or if it's expecting a list and you're only doing one, or if you're doing one and it's expecting a list. So one thing I do need to point out before we move on is we also need to click here to add an action. We're going to need to make a change to a thing. So far, we've added new things. This is the first time or created new things. This is the first time we're making changes to a thing. And the thing that we need to make a change to is the current user, because here, the profile, remember the profile and the user are cross-referenced. So when we created the user with the sign up button, we didn't have a profile to add to the user. We hadn't created one yet. Now we've created the profile, we've added the user to the profile, but now we need to add the profile to the user. So I'm going to click here, changes to the current user, and I'm just going to change the profile, and I'm going to set it as the result of step 1. So the result of step 1 is the new profile that we made, and we're going to put that profile's reference into the profile field of the current user. Okay. So now I'm going to preview the page. And I am not currently logged in, so I need to log in. And now you can see I'm logged in. And so now I should be able to create my profile. Okay, so the first thing to creating my profile, I want to go ahead and upload a picture. So I'm going to click Upload Profile Picture, and I'm going to choose my headshot. And now it's uploaded. And then I'm going to add my first name and my last name, my date of birth, and you'll see it's nice that I have the years to choose from. This is a setting that you have to choose in your design. So the date time picker here, so date, and then I have here display drop downs to pick the month and year, and this will save your users a lot of time, especially with dates of birth. So come in here, I'm going to choose, oh my gosh, 1979. Where is it? It's up here somewhere. I wonder if it'll let me type. There we go. Yep, it did. 1979 and November 19th. Then my bio, I am mother to Illy and co-parent to Rom and founder of ProNoCoders. My interests, I'm going to choose Bubble and Didify. I'm going to choose all of them, Flutterflow, Xano, and APIs. All right, but remember, we're not going to save these to the database yet. We're going to have to come back and refactor this later. The company is going to be ProNoCoders. My title is going to be founder. My years at company is going to be 2.5. Oh, it's not going to allow me to choose a decimal. And the reason it's not going to allow me to choose a decimal is because this is an integer. We set it to expect an integer, which won't allow decimals. So I'm going to say 2, and then I'm going to say 3. I'm going to click to upload a resume. Well, right now I don't have a resume, so I'm going to show you a shortcut that I think is pretty helpful. If I go to LinkedIn, and I go into my own profile, I can click on this More button and I can save to PDF, and I can kind of use that as my resume. So I'm going to go ahead and click my profile here to upload that as my resume. And now reference letters, I'm just going to pick multiple files. I'll just do the two that I've already done, and we'll just open those. And you can see it's uploading more than one at the same time. And so now I can click the Save button. And again, Bubble isn't showing me anything about what's happening. I haven't given Bubble any information about what to do after I click that Save button, other than to save things to the database. So to see if it worked, I can go to my Data tab, into my App Data, and I can see here I have a profile. My bio is saved, my company is saved, my name, so my first, last, my first, last, my interests we didn't save, but my reference letters are there, my profile resume is there, my picture is there, years, so it looked like it worked. And to double check, I can just go to the users, and I can see here that my one user now has a profile, which is referenced here, and I can see that it's saved. So everything is working. We have completed the forms. So the forms are functional for signing up, logging in, resetting the password, and creating the profile. But when we preview the page, you'll notice that it's not particularly appealing because it's all showing at the same time, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and log out here. And I did one thing in order to preview that page. I disabled this workflow because remember, when the page is loaded, if the user is logged in and active and has a profile, it would kick the user to the index. And so in order to show this page, I had to disable that workflow. But that's a temporary thing. We'll re-enable it shortly. So now the question is, how can we make it so just the sign up shows up when the user is trying to sign up, and just the login shows up, and just the reset password, or just the create your profile? So I'm going to come to my design, and just like we did with the create account button on the home page, or this whole group on this page, we're going to uncheck that this element is visible on page load for each of these separate groups. So the sign up group, we're going to click into it, then we're going to uncheck this element is visible on page load, and we're going to check the collapse when hidden. And what this is going to do is, when the sign up form is not visible, it's going to pretend it never existed in the first place, and so the login will shift all the way up to take the place where the sign up used to be. We're going to do that for each of our 4 groups. Uncheck that the element is visible on page load, and check the collapse when hidden. And then if you remember, on the home page, when we did that with the create account and sign up buttons, we also created conditionals to show the groups again. So right now, there's nothing that I can do to show one of those groups. I go to the page and everything is hidden on page load. And so now I need to decide which method I'm going to use to show things on the page. And I think I'm going to go ahead and use page paths. I choose page paths when there's only one option and it's hierarchical, meaning I'm going to show up to the login page. That's the top hierarchy. The first page path will be login. And then it is either going to be in the sign up mode, the login mode, the reset password mode, or the create your profile mode. There's no other options. There's not tabs and subtabs and things like that. So this is a 2-step process. The first is the conditional that we set in order to show the group. So that's where we're going to start. I'm going to start with the conditional on the sign up group. I'm going to define a new condition, and I'm going to start getting information from the URL. So I'm going to type in get data from the page URL. And I'm going to say the type of data that I want to get from the page URL is going to be the path segments as a list. Now, what does that mean? Here, I'll show you what that means. So I'm in my app, in my preview here, and this is my URL. For simplicity, I'm going to go ahead and take the debug mode off again. And now you can see this is the domain of my app, right? So I have a subdomain and a primary domain. And then I have this slash here. And so after the domain, every slash is defining a page path. When I am using a version dash here, Bubble is going to not count that altogether. It's just going to leave that off of the count. So my first page path is login. That's the page's name. And so now I'm going to look for the second page path, and in this case it'll be sign up. And when it is sign up, I'm going to want to show something in particular. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say get data from page URL, path segments as a list. Now I have to tell it which path I'm looking for. And when we're working with lists in Bubble, you'll notice that the first operator here is to count, and then we'll come in here and it'll give us some options about which item in the list we're concerned with. And so we're going to use the item number because we know which item we're looking for, and say item number 2. So when we're looking at the second page path and it is sign up, and this is you have to be very careful with spelling here. Then we're going to say this element is visible. So now when I preview, it's going to say nothing because I haven't, right now it doesn't have a second page path, it just has one. And now I'm going to change it and I'm going to add a new page path and I'm going to call it sign up. And click enter, and now my sign up form is showing. All right, so that's the first part of getting your conditionals right for hiding and showing sections of a page, right? We're using page paths. They're hierarchical and they're cleaner. They look the best out of all of our options, but they do allow the user to save the URL, which is helpful. All right, so we want to copy, so I'm going to right click and copy this condition. And I'm going to paste this condition and just change the word for each of my sections. So login will be login. Reset password will be reset. And create profile will be profile. So now if I change the page path to login, my login form will show. If I do reset, my reset password will show. And if I do profile, my profile will show. So the next part is determining how can we switch between these, or how can we arrive at a particular one from somewhere else. So remember on our home page, on our index page, oh, no, I was wrong. It was the home page. On our home page, we had the 3 buttons, and depending on which button we click, we might want to do something different. So we've got our create account and our sign up buttons. We want to send the user to the login page, but we want to show the sign up form. So to do that, I'm going to edit the workflow here, and I'm going to say go to page login, and in the data to send, I'm going to say sign up. And I'm also going to do that for the create account. But for the login button, I actually want to send them to the login form, so I'm going to send in the word login. So now if I preview this page, get rid of the debug mode, I'm going to click create account, and it's going to take me to the sign up form, or I can click login and it will take me to the login form instead. Now if I arrive on the page and I don't say which one to go to, I want it to default to a specific one. So in addition to when the page is loaded and on the login page here, we'll re-enable this workflow. When the page is loaded, if the user's logged in and they have a profile, we'll kick them to the index, and then we'll navigate and we'll go to page, and the page will be the login page, and the data to send will be sign up. And we're only going to do that if we don't have a second page path. So if I get data from the page URL and I choose path segments as list, and I say item number 2, because we're concerned with the second page path, and if it is empty, then we're going to send them to the login page and send in a page path for the second page path of sign up. That way, when I preview the page, it will no longer be blank. And now once I'm on the page, I need to make these options of already have an account, go to the login, and so forth. So that's what we'll do next. So now I'm going to come into my main wrapper group. I'm going to click on my different groups. So when I click on already have an account, log in, I'm going to add a workflow here, and we're going to use the navigate, go to page. It'll be the page login. And we'll just type login. For the login, if we click reset password, we want to navigate, go to page login, but send in the page path reset. For need an account, we'll do navigate, go to page login, and we'll send in sign up. For the reset password, for remembered password, we'll navigate, go to page login, and we'll choose login. So I'll preview the page, and now I should be able to switch to all of my different screens. I can navigate within the page to whichever form I need to fill out, except my create profile form. And that's the thing that we're going to add to the sign up button here. So when I successfully sign up, and this is not a sign up button, this is they're all named the same thing. So a quick way to get back to a button to rename it, in this case, I can go here and I can reveal the element, and I could say, oh, this isn't the button sign up, this is the button to reset. So send reset link. And the same here. So this is the sign up button, so this one will keep. This one is not the sign up button, it's the login button, so I'll reveal the element and we'll call it login. And I think that takes care of that. So on the actual sign up button, we're going to sign the user up. And after we sign the user up, we want to navigate, we want to go to page, and we want to switch to the create your profile. So we'll go to login and we'll go to profile. And just to test this, we're going to sign up again. Now, here's a trick when you're testing in Bubble. You want to make sure that you're using real emails and not dummy emails, especially after you get your email client set up working with Bubble, because you never want to be sending emails to fake addresses because they will bounce and they will harm your delivery rate, which will prevent you from being able to accurately send emails to other people in the future. So how do you create emails? Like, you don't want to manage 40 different inboxes, right? So I'm going to use the same email as I did before. I'm just going to add a plus button, and I know this works with Gmail. So I'm going to add a plus button, and I'm just going to say to here, and then at gmail.com. Now, Gmail will ignore everything after this plus, the plus and everything after it. So it will deliver the email to tanyaMcGar@gmail.com as if the to here wasn't even typed. But Bubble will recognize this as a completely separate email address and treat it as such. So type in a password, click sign up, and now it's taking me to create my profile. And you can see that I'm logged in up here at the top. So after I finish creating my profile, which we already know works because we tested it, we have to say, what are we going to do on this save button? And after we click the save button, we're going to want to send the user to their portal page. So let's just add that functionality right now. So we'll navigate, go to page, we'll go to the portal page, and we won't send any information in. So then if I'm on this page again, I'm already logged in, and I'm on my profile. I'm going to go ahead and add my picture, my first name, last name, same date as birth as before, so we'll do 1979, November 19th, mother to Illy, co-parent with Rob, founder of ProNoCoders. I'll just choose a few because it doesn't matter. It's going to not save them anyway. Company is ProNoCoders. Title is founder, 3 years at the company. Click to upload a resume. And click to add reference letters. And go ahead and click the save. And it's navigating me to the portal page. All right, so let's go back to our scope. And we have handled the already have an account, so that's done. We've done reset password and need an account. We've done remembered password. And we've navigated away from the profile, so we're done with our login page. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of these complete, and we'll get started next on our account page.